Good morning, VivaTech, and welcome to day 3. And let me just start by saluting all of you who are hardy enough to get up this morning and drag yourselves to the venue. We appreciate you being here. I'm super excited to have this conversation today with Stéphane Ficaja of Upway, direct from Corsica. Welcome, Stéphane.
Thank you, Chris. Super excited to be here today and to be able to talk a bit about Upway and mobility and circularity.
So let's start with the basics. What is Upway? What is the mission?
So Upway is a company that was founded 4 years ago by Toussaint and I. So I'm the co-founder of Upway. And what we do is very simple and very complex at the same time. It has nothing to do with AI, actually. It's buying, refurbishing, and reselling e-bikes. And we do that across 8 countries, in Europe and the US, across 6 up centers, meaning warehouses where we refurbish ourselves, and then we resell online to consumers on their doorsteps. So that's a bit about it. It's basically a business that has been exiting a lot for cars. You might know Carvana in the US, like Auto Hero in Germany, and we do that for e-bikes.
And it's interesting because it's one of these concepts. At a certain level, it sounds simple, like we fix up bikes and then we resell them. And we'll dig into that more. Obviously, there's a lot more involved to it than that. But I want to go back kind of to your origin story, so to speak, because this is the founder stage. Tell us what you were doing before Upway, and then kind of how you came into this mission and got motivated to start the company.
So basically, like very quick academics, I have I did some engineering, quantum physics, fundamental math, so nothing that helps you fix an e-bike, unfortunately. And I spent a bit of time doing finance, and then spent a big time of my professional career, 7 years, at Uber. It was super exciting. I met my co-founder there. I was super grateful to be able to build a consumer business from scratch. I worked across multiple geographies in Europe, across EMEA, in the US and Canada, on different businesses. And so that was a bit of a genesis of being excited by building things and building consumer products. So that was really about it first. And then at one point with my co-founder, we wanted to get back to building. Uber was a post-IPO company, entering S&P 500. We wanted to get back to something more early stage to build and to shape consumer habits. And this is how we got back to, okay, we want to start something new, we want to get to building something, and to start Upway. And the main thing that got us super excited about Upway is we love shaping consumer habits. We love to actually see that electric mobility is a long-term trend. It's something that really boomed during COVID, has been slightly more stable in the past year, but we strongly believe it's something that will keep growing in people's mind and in consumer habits every day. At the same thing, we are obsessed about providing the best customer experience with the best technology and make sure that we help people move around with something that has a mission. And I'm personally in love with circularity, so that's a bit about it.
Yeah, and so, again, it's interesting to see the e-bike phenomenon emerge in many different ways. And of course, you think about the business, there could be, we saw a lot of money spent in certain ways in terms of e-bike sharing or other businesses that had mixed results. But to focus on you guys, I came to France 11 years ago. And let's say 5 or 6, 7 years ago, there was a big bet on hardware companies that was going to be a distinctive thing that French startups could do. And I would say, for the most part, that ended up not working out so great. Hardware was difficult as a business, dealing with physical stuff. SaaS, not to say it's simple, but the costs, the variables you control, it was a lot safer bet for venture capital. So you're taking a business that refurbish goods. Again, when I think of fixing a bike, I think I'm going to take it to my shop. I'll get it fixed. Maybe they sell some used bikes there. But you want to make a business. You want to scale it. you want to make it a kind of model that attracts venture capital. So what was the initial challenge? Was it a technical one? Was it a logistics one in terms of what you had to kind of map out before you could convince investors that this could be more than just two guys in a bike shop fixing electric bikes?
So that's actually a super relevant point, which is that a lot of hardware companies were created, like in the past years, some with great success, some with like probably a bit less. But the main thing that we discovered is doing manufacturing is hard. And the reason why it's hard is that you need to iterate on your product. Your first product is never going to be easy. So a lot of companies went out there to start and create e-bikes. And then what they discovered is like your first e-bike, unless you ride like 1 million kilometers with 10,000 clients who go through a lot of different situations, a lot of usage, descent, climbs, like sand, rain, snow, whatever, like you are going to take a lot of time to build a product that is reliable, that is convenient, and that is comfortable. So the first thing was being a manufacturer is hard. The thing about our business is that we are not a manufacturer. What we do is that we rely, of course, on manufacturer expertise. We work with them. But actually, what we do is that we get bikes that are used and get it as good as new. So it's far easier because it's a product that already exists, that is already on the market, so we don't need to invent the product. And I think that's the main reason why we had, like investors believing in us. We had actually great success in even repairing the bikes. We don't have a lot of quality issues. When you repair a brand that is very reliable, of course your bike is going to be reliable. So that's something that we discovered, and we really stick to actually making sure that we serve the market, serve the ecosystem, and ultimately the consumer into bringing them the best expertise and actually getting a bike that is actually like the most reliable possible.
And just to be clear, if I'm coming to you, you'll take any used bike, or do you have criteria for what kind of used bikes you take?
So we only do e-bike, so we'll not take a mechanical bike, and we'll take probably like 90 to 95% of the e-bikes out there. There are some brands, models that maybe will not take, but we generally cover 95% of the e-bike in circulation on the market.
So even if you're not manufacturing the bike from the ground up, you have a lot of different models coming in that could be in very wide range of condition and have components that are not necessarily standard, anything from the classic bike parks to the elements of the electric capacity of the bike. So in terms of, you still need to imagine set up a logistics supply chain, some way of managing that you're getting the parts when you need them, where you need them. It seems like a very complex task, but you were able to convince investors that you would be able to set up this supply chain in a way that, again, there's one thing to do it, and there's another way to do it in a way that's economically feasible to actually create a business. I mean, I imagine there must have been some pushback or a lot of questions about, okay, can you really get to that to scale?
Yes, and especially when we launched in 2021, 22, we're still riding like the end of the COVID issues with supply chain, especially from Asia, where a lot of parts were manufactured. So we got a lot of shortages and a lot of questions. The reality and the great thing about circularity is if you are a manufacturer, you need a lot of spare parts, like millions. When you refurbish, the good thing that you need far less, meaning that, of course, it's hard, and then I can talk a bit more about it, but our need for spare parts was far lower than anyone else in the market. And that means that not only it was less of a drag for our P&L, but at the same time, it was also easier for us to actually get to small volumes and figuring out what to do.
So if I look at the footprint of Upway today, can you describe a little bit? Obviously, you have a headquarters here in Paris. And then you have how many facilities where you're doing the refurbishment?
So today our headquarters is in Paris. This is where we have like our tech teams, we have our HQ. France is actually not at all our biggest business. Our biggest market is Germany. We have 2 up centers. We're going to open probably like a third one this year. We're also present at the BNL with 1 up center, maybe another one year, another one this year, and then 2 in the US, in New York and LA. So we are headquartered in Paris. We have a coverage that is all Europe, and Northern Europe is definitely like a big part of our business.
And then once you have this up and running, you have to convince people that, hey, a refurbished bike is a reliable, safe, affordable alternative, plus good for the environment. But that's not always a persuasive case, depending on the consumers. I think back to my own personal experience with smartphones. 10, 12 years ago, I never would have thought about buying a used smartphone or a refurbished smartphone. Today, I probably bought my last 5 or 6 from back market. And I understand there's this whole network of refurbishing. It's a whole massive industry now to refurbish these. Apple is in this business. So that's pretty accepted that that's a alternative that is reasonable, that I can count on, that has its own value. When it came to convincing people about, again, a bigger structure, a refurbished bike, people don't necessarily have a long history of buying e-bikes up to this point. What was the challenge in gaining that consumer trust and convincing people that this was a valuable alternative to going out and buying the brand new bike, fancy bike off of some big show floor?
Yeah, so there is a lot to say about like the refurbishment, how people see refurbished goods. It also depends on the market, on the perception. So it's super interesting. My thoughts are a bit of a following after like a few years in this industry. The first thing is that people, and especially consumers, are in the market to buy an e-bike. What they are looking for is to buy the best quality at the lowest price, like everyone. And when you look at the car industry, which is far more developed, a lot of people buy like second-hand or refurbished because it's a far better deal than buying new. So our mindset was to start with, our market is not the second-hand market or the refurbished market. It's the full market of everyone who is having a credit card, who wants to buy an e-bike. Is that for leisure? Is that for a cargo bike for your children? Is that like to commute? And then to basically give them the best deal. And what we have been seeing is that refurbishing was a great way to lead to 2 things. One was a huge selection, because then you have a huge variety of products. We have like more than 3,000 bikes online. We are literally have the biggest bike shop probably in Europe. And then we have great prices. We are 50 to 60% cheaper than you. So then it becomes very compelling. If you want to buy a very high-end cargo bike for your family, having that at minus 60% start to be like a great deal. But then you start to face the issue of trust, meaning that people say, hey, like I've always been buying new. It's an expensive purchase. So what should I do about trust? How can I make sure that I trust this company? And for us, the only way you can solve it is to have standards that are so high that people will trust you, will be impressed, they will have a magical experience and then tell their friends about it. And for that, I think that companies like Back Market in France, for example, did an amazing job at making sure that they were putting a great light behind refurbishment and even the term refurbish. And what is super interesting, and the problem we face, is that refurbished in French has a positive note, while refurbished in the US has a negative note. And it's a good signal of how perception can change between countries where you have companies who can really drive circular economy, explain what they do, and provide a great experience to consumers. Ultimately, we are there for a long run. We have a sustainable business. We are growing fast. We are backed by great investors. And we know that the main thing we need to keep focusing on is provide the best consumer experience, to provide the maximum of trust. And then consumers, they will make their minds. They will choose. And we think that they will choose ultimately our refurbished bikes.
And by the way, I just want to say we are happy to take questions from anybody who's feeling energetic and curious. Stéphane loves to get questions. So if you put your hand up, I believe we have someone who'll come around with a microphone, or you can just shout it out because we're in an intimate enough setting. But meanwhile, I have a few more questions in our remaining time here. You mentioned Germany, and we talked about this before, but that was surprising to me because I hate to be too caught up in stereotypes, but you think Germany, you think cars, for obvious reasons. They have a long history. It's the Autobahn, all the images you have there, but it's become one of your biggest markets. Was that a surprise to you as well? And why? Do you have a good sense of why that ended up happening?
So, super interesting. Germany is our biggest market. It's also obviously the biggest market for cars, and also the biggest market for e-bikes in Europe. And what is super interesting is every time I talk to some American investor, they tell me, in the US, e-bikes will never work. We are a car company. I'm like, market. I'm like, German, they probably think that they are a car country also, and they're also an e-bike country. Basically, what happened in Germany is super interesting. It's a true willingness of the government to actually push for manufacturing e-bikes, providing some subsidies through very specific way, like leasing through employers, to make sure they were developing the usage of e-bikes plus building infrastructure. And they are far ahead over European countries, except Netherlands probably. And a lot of countries are trying to catch up now. But by doing that in advance, by making sure that consumers were using the equipment, by building infrastructure, they've been able to develop a huge e-bike economy. So they have the biggest manufacturer in Europe, at least, and probably in the world, in competition with some Taiwanese. They have the biggest companies, and overall, they have the biggest brands, the best brands. They export a lot. So they really made a lot of effort to actually build a great market for e-bikes and a great industry. And for us, it became almost a necessity to go there. It was a market where we're a bit anxious to enter. It's always hard, like when you're a French company, to be willing to expand, especially to Germany. But ultimately, we went well as soon as we understood that German consumers want the same thing as a lot of consumers. They want high-quality products with actually, the lowest price and the best quality and the best trust. And this is what we're able to provide, and we keep providing in Germany.
And I'm sorry, remind me, how many countries are you in now?
So we're operating in 8 countries. We are in France, in Spain, Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and the US.
Okay, so we just have a few minutes left. Looking forward and thinking about scaling to the next stage, what are the challenges there, and what are the criteria you think about in terms of entering new territories? How you think about that in terms of, again, is it logistical challenge, a cultural challenge, a financing challenge, and how you raise the money or convince investors to go along the ride to the next stage?
When you look at the market, the key thing for me from a geographic perspective is you want to make sure that you cover as much population as possible. That's important. Like small countries, by definition, have a small markets. You, of course, look at the GDP and then the size of your existing market. So it's a mix of potential for population, potential in GDP, and at the same time, of course, where is the status of the market? If you have a market where no one uses an e-bike, it makes no sense for us. I worked at Uber, so we want very, very far in, the long tail of countries. We're operating in very, very small countries that I was given the chance to lead, and waking up in the morning with an issue in a very small country that is a legal, urgent issue that takes one day of your brain to even understand the issue, then solve it and make a call, can be very disruptive. So our take at Upway is we want to focus on the biggest countries. So we are probably going to stay in Western Europe, US and Canada. We might actually want to go to Japan at one point, so we want to keep the option open to go there. Maybe Australia, but probably that's going to be the key areas we want to be excellent at and focus our energy on, because long term, when we look at the enterprise value of a company and this is what we tell our investors, 95% plus will be in the country we already operate in. So, of course, we can go to Italy, of course, we can go to Portugal, to Denmark. We'll need to go to the UK at one point, but most of the market that we cover today is actually the future value of the company.
Well, of course, I remember those early days of Uber and the drama of country by country and in the U.S. state by state, of course. But it's also one thing to be, not to say that it was easy, but it's one thing to make that calculation given that model that's sort of, as they used to call it, asset light. If you had to pull out of a country, okay, we switch it off. We'd spent money, we had some investment, we lose that, okay. Here, if you decide, okay, I'm going to Australia, you've got to create some physical infrastructure. You've got to put money literally into the ground to create that. So it's a bit more of a commitment, let's say, to say, okay, we're doing that. We have this capital expenditure we have to make. We've got to really be sure, to some degree, that this is going to make it work. We can make this work. So do you have that set criteria? Is it just the density of the population, or are there other things you look at to think, okay, this gets us over that hurdle and makes it possible to make that investment decision?
For sure, the barrier to entry is higher. It's going to cost you more. You are going to deploy more capex. You will need to have more capital to enter a new market. If we go to Japan, for example, it's going to be probably pretty expensive. So you probably need to think twice. Then I think very fast what you discover, and that's my experience expanding to a lot of countries, being in 8 countries after not even 4 years was a bet. I think it was driving a lot of people, including our investor, quite uncomfortable, let's say. But ultimately, the best way to learn is actually to do it, to be clear that you, in your mind, you set some money aside to say, okay, this money will go into trying to make as much progress as possible in this market, to see it as an investment and a test, and be ready to pull back and exit the market. I think from a mental perspective, you need to see that as an investment that you do, and then you don't want to, you don't want to be dying by 1,000 cuts because you keep investing, because you're there and then you invested, so you want to stay there. But at the same time, you also want to go all in, because if you don't try, it will not work out for sure.
Let me just kind of come back to a very personal question now, if you're okay. Again, I know from the history of Uber that people who were involved in that felt there was a certain mission to the company, of course, and mobility and what it was doing. But you even more specifically got into this business because you felt a calling, in a sense, an opportunity around the environment, impact, and those things. Now that you're 4 years into that journey, how do you feel personally about it? Does it feel like a very different experience leading a more directly a mission-led company, one that's focused on impact? Does it have a certain, again, is this feeling different for you personally, the pleasure, the challenge, the stress that you take from the experience of being a founder?
Well, I'm not going to lie, Uber was tough. When you go there and you're facing some drawback from taxes, strikes, governments, it was tough times. So for sure the experience is totally different. I think the inner motivation of being obsessed with mobility and providing people a way to move around, for me, is very important, so I love it. And for my co-founder, it's super important also. But there is really a difference between the Uber times where the outside world was having a negative perception at the company. That changed. And our business where we only got great feedback. We are into electric mobility, we are into basically refurbishment, and ultimately we are into building factories in Europe, in countries where they're afraid of factories leaving countries. So honestly, it's doing great. I'm not going to lie, but very different and also very positive for me and for the mission of the company.
Great. Well, congratulations. We've reached the end of our time. We have the angry red clock now on the wall. So we're going to stop there. Please, everyone, give a warm round of applause to Stéphane, and thank you all again for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone.